with our weekly policy committee meeting for the police commission. I will just begin very quickly and just ensure we've got a basic number of quorum here. I'd like to do it in order here, but I may just do it in order of how I see folks on my screen. Hold on here. Actually, I think I do have my list here. So let me begin with, do we have Mr. Allen here?
Yes, I'm here.
Good evening. Hi, Mr. Allen. Ms. Blau. Mr. Lucas, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ms. Gilchrist. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Dr. Jackson, are you here?
I'm here.
Thank you. How are you? Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Gilchrist, by the way. Good to see you, Dr. Jackson. I see also, just want to make sure Mr. here.
I'm here.
Hi there. Good evening. Perfect. We have also Mr. Johnson. He's not quite with us yet. No problem. Ms. Freeman.
Hi, I'm here.
Good evening. Hi, Ms. Freeman.
Thank you. Hi to you.
Hi there. I'm going to pause and get the hellos back too, by the way. I was zooming through the rows and not pausing long enough to let people respond. Mr. Matt.
Present.
Hi, Mr. Matthews. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Thank you. And do we have Captain Oliver? Is Mr. Oliver here? Not quite yet. I do not see Mr. Pulley listed quite yet, but I know he'll join us shortly. Oh, don't see him quite yet. Mr. Robinson, I think I did see you here. Mr. Robinson?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Hi there. And Mr. Woods. Do we have Mr. Woods?
I'm here.
Hi, Mr. Woods. How are you? Good evening. Thank you. We have, I think we're missing 4, but we have 10 members of the committee here. You all feel free. Ms. Lucas, I want to pause to and acknowledge you're here with us as well. Vice Chair Lucas.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was having some audio issues, so I had to switch systems. So I apologize about that.
No apology needed in this virtual world. I've been sitting in an office since 7 in the morning, so I chose to sit outside for this. And if I can get my camera to work with you, I will. But I'm happy to see and hear everyone. Also, a special welcome as well to Captain Alexander, as well as Executive Director Fitchard, who will they will both be joining us in the later part of the meeting here. And acknowledge also we do have with us Mr. Brown, I believe is on the line with us, as well as Ms. Cirillo as well. So good evening there. And we cannot do any of this without Metro ITS. So thank you, Ms. Gilchrist, as well. On the, we'll stay very close to our agenda today, and we've done the call to order as well as the roll call. As far as the updates and review of the agenda, expert testimony schedule, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time here. I believe we all have the handout and the information related to the agenda for tonight. We'll welcome, after our opening remarks and a bit of housekeeping, Ms. Cirillo as well as Ms. Bilal. Once she's joined us, will talk to us about the PPC process, as well as the data committee, and just some next steps, important next steps that we should all be aware of. And then after we heard from them, Ms. Lucas is actually, we're going to move agenda item, and it's a bit out of the space there, but actually agenda item 7 up to the beginning to talk a bit about the member assignments and how we will be ordering ourselves for the next couple of weeks so that we have our preliminary recommendations in place. But as far as tonight, once we had the housekeeping out of the way, Captain Mike Alexander will join us to speak about no-knock warrants, and we'll have time for Q&A. And then after that, we'll have Executive Director Fitchard, who will be speaking about specifically to COB recommendations and best practices for strengthening the relationship between MMPD and the COB. And then we'll be poised to wrap up the meeting with any final comments from members of the committee and prepare for next week. I hope, let me pause and just ask, is there any questions about that at all, as far as the agenda or our schedule? Okay.
Ashley, can you hear me? I'm on a call. I'm on the phone. I'm not on the WebEx.
Okay.
I'm on the call. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Absolutely. Yes, I can. And Mr. Oliver, I you for sure. Oh, is this Mr. Oliver or Mr. Sherrill? Mr. Sherrill.
This is, yeah, Sherrill.
Mr. Sherrill. Hey there. Hey,
Yeah.
feel free during the Q&A to just simply unmute and interject here because I won't be able to see your hand raised. But welcome. We got you. We absolutely can hear you. Welcome.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for the rest of our just week or subsequent weeks, next week we will be joined by Amanda Brock and Dr. Mark Chair, both very well-known experts in their respective fields. The following week we scheduled at that time to be to welcome Cooper, and we'll also have the synthesization of our information and come together to try to outline our preliminary next steps and recommendations. You'll see also from that agenda and tracing of the information that we're also scheduled to welcome a procedural justice expert the week of the 15th, as well as Captain Whitehead from the West Nashville precinct. And so we're still awaiting confirmation on those two, but we're hopeful for it. And one important note here is that we will welcome, or we continue to extend invitations to members of the public to join us. So Ms. Miller, Angie Miller, will join us next week as well. And we think it's quite important that it balance as much as possible lived experiences of members of the community with the expert testimony we're hearing from our law enforcement officers and other individuals from various sectors as well. So we are poised to get great information on top of the brown bag luncheons that are taking place and the information we keep getting from the SharePoint site too. So with that, I'll go silent here, give the reins over here I want to welcome Ms. Cirillo to speak to us about the PPC process as well as the data committee that has met, I believe, twice now. And then if Ms. Bilal is available, we certainly want to hear from her as well. Ms. Cirillo.
Great. Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our process. This is officially the beginning of the 5th week. It's, as we look sort of at the midpoint, it really means, working with all of you and supporting your process to get to an initial draft of your recommendations and then ultimately to a final version. So I know everybody's hard at work, sleeves are rolled up. There was a tour of the training academy last week. What we're doing to support your process is first and foremost, the data committee has met now twice. And it's really focusing on two, areas. One is data, really looking at very specifically what are some data indicators that relate to each of the committee's charge. and how we can use those indicators as metrics, and especially in defining what are existing problems in the priorities that each committee is identifying. So that's one area. So really looking at data as a way to know how well things are being done and who is better off for it. So those are really the big questions there. The second piece, is being led by Mira Bilal and David Esquivel, and that is really doing a full inventory of procedures and policies and SOPs that are on the books, and just helping us better understand what might be some gaps there. We are very fortunate to have staff members from MNPD out of the Strategic Division, and Dr. Peter Baylor from MNCO supporting the process and keeping us focused. So we benefit from their expertise in those discussions. The work of the data committee, as I said, is really to help generate some very specific data points that we can use to develop recommendations. So that is really going to come together in a half-day planning session with data committee representatives and the chairs of each committee. Because of COVID, we can accommodate those numbers of people and still respect the social distancing environment. And again, that half-day discussion is really an opportunity to bring together all the work that you all are contributing to, and that your chairs will represent you in that process. In that day, what we're going to be looking at is very specifically the logical alignment of problem statement, goal statement, indicator, recommendations, and any subsidiary recommendations. And then also look at how each committee's priorities look across all committees. So we know there are several issues where all committees are really interested in seeing change. A great example is culture. So each committee, I mean, really that issue around culture really sits within the workforce committee. But obviously, as you all look at training, that's going to get at culture as well. As you look at use of force and de-escalation, how that's applied when it's used, that gets at culture too. Just as the communities committee, as they look at community policing and community policing models, how that can change culture as well. So we just want to be sure that there is full alignment, and that the recommendations as they come out from the committee as a whole, from the commission as a whole, that they represent what needs to be there. We want to be sure that we aren't missing any information or any opportunity to make a recommendation. So that's really what that half-day planning session is. And I'm happy to take questions now or offline via email, whatever the committee would like.
Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Any questions here for the committee?
Yeah, hi, Dio. Can I ask when that half-day planning session is planned for?
Absolutely. The current date that we have on the book is the morning of Wednesday, October 14th. All of you, all the commission members received an email. So if we look at the timeline, what we're hoping to get are some draft initial statements by Friday, October 9th, in order to use that information in the planning session. We're still waiting to hear back from chairs and data members to see if the 14th is a go. We have not heard back any concerns about the scheduling so far, but we just want to be sure that we can make our timeline work. And again, this is a working session, so the expectation is that it's perfectly fine to bring draft materials. It's perfectly fine to use it, the working session, as an opportunity to hone that, and then it's perfectly fine to continue to hone your draft after that.
Gotcha. I had that date marked down. I thought that was for our policy committee, but thanks for letting me know. That's actually for the chairs, vice chairs, and the data committee. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Any other questions here? And Mr. Rello, are you also okay with taking questions if folks have just had an opportunity to look through some of the information, or were you planning to get to that separately, perhaps?
I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I don't have the capacity to share my desktop, so you know, I'm just if Ms. Gilchrist would give me that opportunity, I can also open up my desktop and show you some stuff there if you'd like me to do so.
If it's possible, it would be great. We are in a space right now where we will start to meet groups. I know a lot of folks haven't had a chance to dive deep in that, but I think you'd be the best person to kind of give us even just a quick tutorial to get in. Vice Chair Lucas, I don't know if you feel differently or have additional ideas on that. I certainly welcome it to feel so.
No, sounds good. Just FYI, Mira's having a little trouble getting on, so I'm helping her with that, but she should be on shortly.
That's not a problem. Thank you. Ms. Gilchrist, is that feasible for Ms. Sorello to get this temporary access here to show her screen?
Yes, that's,
Thank you.
hold on 1 second. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, let me see what I'm looking at. Okay, so what you'll see in front of you is the folder. And when you open that folder, you're going to see several other subsidiary folders. And we can certainly, you know, I've worked with a couple of members to make sure that they have access. It's a great site. I also want to point out that Madam Vice Chair Amanda Lucas put in a folder on policy committee minutes. We are including all the recordings we get. So we did get the recording for the mental health brown bag. I am still chasing down the recording for the brown bag on interpersonal violence. As soon as I get that, I'll throw that in there. I want to be sure all committee members are aware of the strategic documents we got from MNPD. So if you, you know, certainly the main tenet of planning is we do what we measure. And what we've learned from the department so far, and I'm just going to share this, so hopefully you can see this, is we can see these are the FY21 strategic goals. I'll make them slightly bigger. So we have about, how many goals? 8 goals, I think, here. So this is what the department currently measures as its priorities. And then if you said, okay, so what is the base document to this? One of the things that I learned recently, and we will go, let's see, to move some things. So here in the same folder of strategic documents is what I was told was their ongoing plan, which again is comprised of key performance indicators. So that means they can benchmark their performance against other peer cities. So this is one kind of plan, but this is the place to look for if there are things you really want the department to do, it should be in their plan. So those are some really interesting documents to take advantage of. We can go back up to the main folder. And here are the use of force documents. Here are some of the reports that have been done. We have clearance and traffic stops in there. We have the original document on the science of justice. We have the 2019 review of use of force that MNPD has done. Here, we can open this one. Here's the full data set on use of force. These are, some of these items are in the level set packet, but this covers from 2015 forward. If you want to see the level set packet, you can go back to the file inventory, and that's just a little further down here in a zip folder. There are new things that are being added every day. We've got the Cahoots model up there. This is from Amanda. Amanda just put that in there. I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair Amanda Lucas. We've got arrests that are in there. Let's see. Here's the fact sheet that Dr. Baylor presented on consent decrees. Here's employee demographics. Well, here's a glossary that Madam Vice Chair put up. So there will be more things added. You'll probably see more folders added, but I really encourage everybody to go through it and take a look at the data. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I just wanted to thank Thea for going through that with Cirillo, and also for straightening out our SharePoint link. We want to apologize to everybody who tried to access those documents, but she got us squared away today, and we're very, very appreciative for that.
You bet. Happy to help.
Ms. Cirillo, it's Larry Woods. How are you?
Very good, sir. How are you?
I'm great. Do I understand that this data set does include all the reports that have been sent to us during the commission's time here for the last couple of months?
We are trying to be sure everything's in there, but if you catch something, you let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Any additional questions or comments here from members of the committee? Not. Thank you very much, Ms. Cirillo. Anything else you would add here, Ms. Cirillo, before we proceed?
Not at all, but happy to answer any additional questions offline as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have Ms. Bilal here. Ms. Bilal, we've received, we got a from here of the last two meetings here. Oh, and I have Ms. Cirillo here. We can talk to offline. But I'd love to hear, Bilal, from your perspective on the first two meetings, and perhaps also action items you'd like the committee to be aware of as we move into the next couple of weeks.
Sure. I did send out an email to everybody. You know, there are a lot of documents in the SharePoint folder. I know we've all kind of just recently had access to it. It's so hard when you get this information, I know the day before, the day of, because I know everyone's working and busy. But I would love before the next meeting if people could really spend some time looking at what is in here, because really almost everything is important. And I know it's impossible to look at everything, but the level set packet for sure, as I emailed you all out earlier in the week, is for sure something that we should all really be looking at. I think Dia also opened up the goals sheet also. I think that that's really important. Realize when we look at that we are measuring what we are doing, not necessarily what we should be doing. So as we look at this data, I think that we have to figure out what are the other pieces. I mean, those are what the goals are as they are set now. The KPIs that she showed you is what the police force is doing now. I think in our committee meetings, one of the things that in the data committee we were talking about is we're looking at kind of what we have based on goals as they are now, based on KPIs as they are now. As you know, we have talked about in our committee the importance of culture. We don't really have a KPI for culture because that is a very difficult thing to measure. And so that was one of the discussions that we've talked about, because that's something that I know this committee has been very adamant about wanting to affect change in. And so we have to figure out how we're going to do that. The data committee is working on it, but anyone else that, you know, could contribute to putting KPIs together in that arena would be great. We are also looking at diversity issues, you know, within the cultural piece too. And we are also looking at the need for an important community engagement piece that really doesn't exist in the current goals either. That's something we've talked about that's important. And again, we don't have a KPI for that either. So again, just because it's difficult to measure, it's something we're all looking at, but any feedback from any of you all in those arenas, I think would be great, because as we want to expand what we're doing and really kind of create something that's measurements of what we should be doing, not just what we are doing, we are going to need to get that information together pretty soon.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Bilal. We'll do our due diligence, and to that point too, I do think I appreciate us to be mindful, not just of what's in front of us, but what could be, what should be. I appreciate that you've been asking questions too, which is to get us to think more creatively about what's out there, because it's easy to measure what we're doing now, but to your point, we should be thinking creatively in a lot of different areas. I will just say for myself, I need to take some meaningful time to dive deep into all the information we've gotten recently. So I'll be doing that, because I believe my subcommittee is meeting next week as well. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Any questions here or comments here from Ms. Bilal? And I want to just thank her publicly again for leading us in this space. But she can only lead us appropriately if we do our part in getting her feedback and thoughts and questions here. Any questions or comments here? And if not, Ms. Lucas, if you could just guide us briefly through what we should be thinking about in the next week or so in our subcommittees.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mira, for your work with the data committee. And I think that you're absolutely right. And that's something that, you know, we talked about. I think it was our chair and vice chair meeting with Mayor Dean is, but I think it is important to understand that there is a variety of knowledge of how these systems work. And I think that there is a certain amount of background of how things are currently done, that so we can understand and not have to, you know, focus on that. So I think it's been very valuable to, you know, meet with the instructors of the academy, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Officer Alexander. But yeah, now is definitely the time to sort of shift toward what are the recommendations that we're going to be developing for what we should do moving forward. To that end,
can I just add one thing in really quick?
Oh, please.
Before you change subjects.
Sure.
I also wanted to just say, you know, we have to realize as we look at this that our police officers in our law enforcement, you know, they have won so many accolades, you know, on all of these benchmarks that are out there nationally. So we're doing a lot of what they are doing, a lot of what we are asking them to do. So if we aren't happy with things, and this commission was created because the community isn't happy with things, we really are going to have to spend a little time figuring out how to get outside the box, because
absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And if there are any other things on the SharePoint site, I know you've emphasized the level set packet. If there are any other documents there that you feel like are kind of mandatory reading for folks, please feel free to, you know, highlight those, either send them to us and we can send them out, or you could go ahead like you did, which was so helpful, and send them to the committees. That would be great. All righty. So I have reached out to y'all already about the different issue areas. We identified 5. This isn't a final list. You know, there can be things, obviously, we're going to be talking tonight with Ms. Fitchard about the Community Oversight Board, and that's a really important piece. But it's accreditation standards, excessive force, disciplinary procedures, training, and racial disparities in use of force. And what we wanted to ask tonight, we wanted to get your feedback, is if people think it is feasible to get with these subcommittees and maybe meet for even 30 minutes a week. I know that may be a big ask because you're already giving a lot of your time to doing a lot of this research that we've asked you to do and then attending these meetings. I want to thank Warwick again for putting together that trip to the Academy last week. That was extremely helpful. We got a lot of good information from that. But wanted to see, are people able to make progress? I know Mr. Matthews said that they had already scheduled some meetings around accreditation. Just wanted to get a feeling for whether or not people feel like this is something that's doable for them, in addition to the other asks that we've already made, and just wanted to kind of open up the floor for discussion about it. Maybe I should start by saying, does anybody have any questions about what they've been asked to look into, or B, any concerns about their ability to participate outside of these meetings on Thursday night, so that we could adjust it to try to accommodate what your work schedule and your other obligations can allow?
Hey, go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say that there were a couple of times that I had to leave early, and so I do want to know which subcommittee that I was placed in, so that I can use the leader.
Could you turn your volume up a little bit, Dr. Jackson? I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. That may be me.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you so much.
Okay. I was just saying there were a couple of times that I had to leave early from the meeting, and I was just wondering which subcommittee was I placed in. Okay,
let me see. Dr. Jackson, I have you on the disciplinary procedures subcommittee with Mr. Pulley and Mr. Sherrill.
Okay.
And I sent out an email, I believe it was today or yesterday. I apologize. I've had an extremely busy week. I can't remember exactly when that email went out. Just touching base with you all, so you all will have each other's email for your small subcommittee. So yeah, that would be discipline. And just want to see if people have no objection, then we'll just ask you to go ahead and start meeting once a week for 30 minutes to just touch base about whatever progress you're making. If you look over the questions that I sent you, and I'm happy to send them to you again if you need me to, those were just kind of like a starting point to start thinking about some of these questions, like Mira was just saying, like, these are the issues that we're being, we in the community are saying is an issue. Here are the things that we think the department's doing great, and they are, meeting and exceeding these national standards extremely well. That's fantastic. But here are some things that we've heard from the community that we really need to focus in on and see if we could do better as a city. So those questions are jumping off point. If there are other questions, once you get into the material that, please don't feel restricted by them or constricted by them. If there's other things that come up for you, please do that. But we just really need people to sort of, because we're on such a tight time schedule, to be doing this research away from the meetings and then sort of reporting when we come back about what we're finding out. Does that answer your question?
Sure. And Mr. Matthews, I'll yield my time to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Ms. Lucas, I'm glad you just mentioned reporting. So is the expectation that we just answer the questions that you sent us for each subcommittee, or are we to bring back suggested recommendations that the overall policy committee can discuss around our topic for our subcommittee? What does that reporting back look like, or what should it look like?
Right. Those questions, and let me, I'm just going to pull up the member assignments. So, like for instance, for accreditation, we asked the accreditation folks, which is Mr. Johnson, Mr. Matthews, and Captain Oliver, to please obtain and share data on the CALIA standards, the POST standards, and Campaign Zero's 8 Can't Wait. There, for instance, I happen to be familiar with the 8 Can't Wait. And I apologize, I can't remember which officer was talking about that. It may have been Captain Blair during our trip to the academy last week, where he was saying there's one of the standards out of the 8 about shooting at moving vehicles that MNPD, I think, please someone correct me if I'm incorrect about that, but that was one that they didn't necessarily agree to at the moment. So the issue for you guys was to get that information and to bring it back, but that's a perfect example. If you guys want to make the recommendation that MNPD go ahead and add that 8th principle of the 8 Can't Wait to their processes or their procedures. So I don't want you to feel restricted by that. If there are recommendations about CALIA, if you do research about CALIA and find that there's a different, accreditation standard out there that, a bunch of cities that are comparable to us, I know Captain Blair was the one who mentioned that he wanted to make sure it was comparable, like Charlotte, Mecklenburg and things like that. I think that's an excellent point. We need to compare apples to apples in that regard. But, if there's another accreditation standard that other agencies our size are using, and CALIA isn't the gold standard that it once was. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with CALIA. Please bring that back to us. Absolutely. If there is something out there, but looking at and that goes back to what Dia was talking about and what Mira was talking about those KPIs, those key performance indicators. CALIA may be great, but that may be something other departments left behind. It may still be considered the gold standard, and that's what we need to be, reaching for. I think it's just really important to make sure that we're evaluating these things and making sure that these are the metrics that we want to use to evaluate our police department, and make sure that we are up to date with what the policing sciences and the policing profession consider to be best practices.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other please? Any other questions like that? Any questions or concerns about being able to meet or conduct this sort of research outside of meeting times?
I think the challenge is just going to be connecting with your subcommittee and making sure that everybody can actually agree on a time to meet, because everybody's schedules are so hectic. So, but I sent an email out last week trying to connect with my subcommittee, and I didn't get a response back. So I don't know if they're not getting my emails or, so if anybody who's on my subcommittee didn't get my email, let me know. But I'm trying to initiate some kind of contact so we can start meeting.
Okay, great. That would be Ashley and Bob.
Yeah, Mr. Delgado, thank you for raising that. I want to say, see your email, but actually I sent one of my own today. But I'll put us up chain too, because sometimes that works a little faster, and we'll get it. Thanks for trying to coordinate us, because I think that's a perfect idea. And I'm sorry I'm the first one.
No, that's fine. And then the other thing I wanted to state, and this was brought up last week at our meeting at the academy, that it might be a good idea as we're making recommendations that we consider, perhaps, because someone brought up the budget, and that's going to be a challenge. Mentioning, like, these things some of our recommendations are going to cost money. So I think it might be good if we're able to have some kind of a breakdown or even separation in some of our suggestions where if there's things that we might be able to suggest that could be more of a community based. For example, we talked about the interpreters, maybe going to Casa Sacran or Conexión Americas and getting people to volunteer as interpreters. That's not going to cost anything. That could go maybe in one column as a suggestion versus having to get more ambulances. That's going to cost money. So something like that.
Absolutely. I think that is an excellent suggestion. And I think that's something also that Mira spoke to last week as well, is those partnerships within the community that doesn't add an administrative or financial burden to either Metro or to the MNPD. And I think that's very doable.
Well, and I also wanted to add on the SharePoint drive, and we should have soon, what are the spending priorities and what they've been over the last several years so that we can specifically look at that. I know that that's something that should be added soon so that we can see some of the budget information.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mayor. I appreciate that. And thank you, Manuel. Mr. Delgado.
Vice Chair, in our email, you mentioned that there might be an expectation that the subcommittees will be prepared to make a report on October, I believe it was 9th or 8th. Can't remember what the date is that week for policy.
It was the 9th.
Oh, okay, the 9th, yeah. We will be sure to let you know about that in terms of when you would be expected to have, your recommendations. Right now, we really want you guys to be meeting and be talking and be looking into the areas that we sent you a while back. That would be great. All righty. Everybody has their assignments. I sent out emails to everybody, so everybody should have their subcommittee emails on there. I agree, Ashley, that sometimes text can be helpful. So if you guys want to exchange information by text, that'll be great. And if you have any questions about anything related to your assignments, please, Bob wanted to be involved in training, and so we were able to make that. Thank you so much, Mr. Sherrill, for being flexible about that. We were able to make that happen. But please, I know nobody has a copious amount of extra time. So, but the more you can do outside of committee would be really, really helpful. Thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lucas. I appreciate this too. We will follow up here. We'll come back to this at the end of the meeting should there be any questions here. But we do want to extend the time and space here to Captain Alexander, who graciously agreed to join us tonight and speak about no-knock warrants. Captain Alexander, I believe I saw you earlier. Welcome. Can you hear us tonight?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, we sure can. And you have the floor.
First of all, it's good to see everyone. Several of you I've worked with over the years, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be able to dialogue with you all tonight. So certainly welcome any questions, and glad to discuss the search warrant issues and anything else that may come up. So good to see everyone, and once again, I do appreciate the opportunity for being allowed to be here and have a conversation with you all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Captain Alexander, to extend any information in the beginning here that you might want to share, and then we'd love to follow up with question and answer if that.
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Glad to. So I know the main topic that was brought to my attention was the no-knock warrant issue. And the fact of the matter is our police department does not participate in no-knock search warrants and haven't in well over a decade. And as far as my experience in the 30 years that I've been here, it's been well over 2 decades. I'm pretty certain Fact of the matter is, a no-knock search warrant has to be approved by a judge. So we have to specifically request a no-knock search warrant that now also has to be approved by the chief of police and authorized by a judge. So we just do not seek those. That is not our process here. Our search warrant procedures never involve a no-knock situation. So our preference is when we arrive on the scene of a search warrant that's been applied for and granted, we prefer a marked car to be present with blue lights, utilizing the public address system for the safety of everyone involved, to let the persons know that this is the police department that you're seeing and hearing outside, and that we are here, what purpose we are there for. Obviously, the knocks are made. All the officers are in proper attire that clearly identifies them as Metro Police officers, whether that's the Metro Police insignia, our patches, our badges being visible, and then obviously who we are and what our intent is once the knocking on the door and the announcements are made. So obviously our preference is for us to be seen. We want everybody to realize, number one, that it's the police department that is there, and number two, what we are there for. So that is our standard practice in terms of going to serve a search warrant. So again, the fact of the matter is, specifically regarding no-knock search warrants, is they just do not exist here. We do not even try to seek those. We don't see any need whatsoever that would ever justify us having to try to seek a no-knock search warrant. So we just do not perform those here in our department.
Thank you, Captain Alexander. And I heard you pause, but I don't want to cut you off. Anything else you would share here before we go?
No, ma'am, not really. I mean, that's just that's the basis of it. We have a very detailed procedure in terms of our search warrants, trying to identify how dangerous it might be for everyone involved in terms of, are there known weapons? Do there happen to be dogs in the house? We try to take everything into account. Our goal is to safely serve that search warrant for everyone inside that location, and obviously as well as other people in the area, and for our officers as well. So, every search warrant requires supervisory approval. Every search warrant requires a supervisor to be on the scene. And quite frankly, we don't have the issues here that some other departments have across the country, either number one, because they do practice the no-knock search warrants, or maybe their process is not quite as meticulous, I should say, as ours. So it's a meticulous process with a threat assessment that's done on each and every one. Obviously, we're concerned about everyone's safety, whether that's the suspects that are involved, who else may be in the residence, and obviously neighbors, people outside in the area, and of course our personnel as well. So that's why we are very much in favor of being seen when we show up to serve a search warrant. So we, once again, like I said, it's just been a couple of decades. We just do not even seek a no-knock search warrant. We just do not see the justification or how that will be beneficial to anyone involved. So our search warrant process is pretty meticulous, but one thing it does not involve is even trying to seek a no-knock search warrant. And some of you may have known that already and being familiar with that, but out of fairness to everyone, some may not. So that's just not our practice here. We do not utilize those, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has about that or anything else if I can.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Hey, Ms. Davis. This is Robert Sherrill. Mr. Alexander, is there any instance that would warrant a no-knock warrant being executed?
I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand you correctly, you said, would there be some sort of instance where we would think we would need to do that?
Yes, sir.
No, ma'am, not that I can think of. There's just nothing crosses my mind that would, first of all, there's no evidence that important that we would need to try to make some sort of entry and jeopardize everyone's safety. Obviously, that would make most reasonable people presume that someone was breaking into their home. There's no case worth that, first of all. There's no evidence worth that in a case. So just to be honest with you, I think our practice for these couple decades have proven that we obviously do not see any sort of justification or a reason to even seek those. So no, ma'am, I can't think of an instance that I would ever even approve that being suggested.
All right, thank you. Last question is, so if you're going to execute a warrant and you announce yourself, what is the delay in announcing yourself and proceeding with knocking down the door? What is that time lapse?
Well, there's no specific time lapse. In other words, so there's not a specific time given in our policy. Our policy says that we should make the announcements. We should get to the entry point. We should notify the occupants of who we are, what we're there to do, and also give any commands such as police, search warrant, please come to the door, please do not resist. And then when appropriate, after the knock, announce and waiting period, wait a reasonable amount of time to enter. And that can, vary in terms of the time. Obviously, you may start there, every scenario is different. So it's hard to cover every single scenario. You may hear movement inside. People may start running out, the back of the house. You may hear a weapon being utilized. There's a lot of different things that would, for everyone's safety, after we knock and announce and feel like we've adequately done so, that we should go ahead and make entry if we just cannot get compliance. The goal is for us to show up, properly announce ourselves, knock on the door, and give persons a chance just to open the door and let it be a compliant situation for everyone's safety. That's obviously how we would prefer that to go each and every time. So I know that that's somewhat of a long answer, but to specifically answer your question, there's not per se a time in there other than saying make your announcements, give persons a reasonable amount of time to comply, and then if you just cannot get compliance, then consider breaching the door at that point. But obviously we would rather just have a compliant situation from the start. So with all the different things that could factor into it, that's just a supervisor's decision on what they hear, what they see, and when is a reasonable amount of time to go ahead and try to make entry, again, if we cannot get compliance.
I had a question too. May I ask it?
Yeah, feel free, Dr. Jackson, and then we'll come to Mr. Matthews.
Yes, Mr. Alexander. I was, of course, reminded from the last question regarding that occurred in the Edge Hill area in which the door was breached. There was some communication, and one of the reasons why the door was not immediately open, one was because it was 6:05 in the morning. The woman who lived there had worked 2 shifts, plus she was not dressed. And even when the door was breached, they did not allow her to put on her top. So this whole idea about reasonable, I wonder, is that reasonable? And if there needed to be someone stationed in the back, station those individuals in the back. And as you said, there's no evidence that important to risk some type of life and death situation like that. And so I would like for you to speak to that.
Sure, yes, sir, and good points, and I appreciate the question. As it specifically relates to the Edge Hill search warrant situation, obviously we as a department immediately realized that there were issues and things that were done during that scenario that we were not pleased with. That's why, Chief Drake took immediate action to decommission officers and supervisors that were involved in that process. Those personnel are still decommissioned today, and the Office of Professional Accountability is looking into that case from start to finish as to the validity of the information, how everything was carried out. So, it's a valid concern. I understand that. Again, the reasonable amount of time is something that, we need to be reasonable about as well when we are on the scene, and supervisors have to make sound judgments. I understand, you mentioned time of day, and it is reasonable to think that a lot of folks, people would still be asleep at that hour. So, you have to take things like that into account to maybe give a little bit more time. People are trying to get up. You know, they may be startled. Obviously, if you startled them out of their sleep, they're trying to figure out what's going on, who it may be. So obviously, when I say reasonable, please don't discount that we need to be reasonable on our end too. I'm speaking as for the police department. We need to make sure that we are reasonable as well in terms of when that decision is made, that we may not actually get compliance and need to breach the door. So I certainly will not sit here and say that there were not issues with how that entire situation occurred. Therefore, that's why our personnel are decommissioned and an investigation is underway regarding that case. So I hope that answers your question. They're good points, and it's a good question.
Mr. Allen, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chair.
Just a moment. I'm sorry. I saw Mr. Matthews' hand raised for a while. Let's go to him, then we'll come.
It's me. Thank you. Mr. Alexander, you mentioned that there is not a case where MNPD would seek, nor do you practice no-knock warrants. Would MNPD entertain putting in place a policy to prohibit no-knock warrants? And a follow-up is, are there discussions of putting any policy like in place going on in the department?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, Mr. Matthews, a good and I appreciate that question. Obviously, I can't speak for Chief Drake. However, to answer your question, in my capacity, since we have not sought a no-knock search warrant in literally years and years and years, I do not think it's unreasonable for us to at least consider making sure something is in our policy. Because quite frankly, if it's something we don't practice and we have not practiced it in years and years and years and have no intention of ever practicing it, then I think it's reasonable to consider putting it into policy. And just a side note too, since the Edge Hill incident, my division, and I'm sorry, I should have explained this to everyone. I'm in charge of the Specialized Investigation Division. We house the narcotics unit, the gang unit, basically your vice unit, gambling, prostitution, things of that nature. So we have brought in all the crime suppression unit teams from all 8 precincts. They have all received a 4-hour course specifically related to search warrant procedures, not only from our personnel, but the district attorney's office was involved and several other people. So again, one, you can't get too much training. 2, it's a good refresher course, and we felt like something we needed to do in light of the Edge Hill incident. So we are trying our best to be proactive in light of the incident that took place. And again, I cannot speak for Chief Drake, but I do not think it's unreasonable to consider adding some sort of policy clause as it relates to no-knock search warrants. No, sir.
Understood, and I appreciate your sharing your opinion. I appreciate that, Captain.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ashley? Ashley, are you there? Can you hear me?
Look like she's muted, Vice Chair.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see her on my list. I was scrolling. Oh, there she is. Well, I'm going to mutiny and decide that I'm going to ask a question next. Hi, Officer Alexander. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time. And we communicated to the officers last week that, the whole point of our efforts is not to point fingers or assign blame. We really, really just want to try to see what we can do to address the concerns of the community. So I just have a couple of questions for you really quickly. If you could please explain the difference between a no-knock warrant, which I understand what you're saying has not been used in some time, and you don't believe that there would be much objection to instituting either a policy or law that we not use them anymore. A knock and announce type approach, which, as Dr. Jackson asked you about, as happened to Ms. Hines in the Edge Hill area, and forced entry. Like, for instance, forced entry happens in a no-knock search warrant, obviously. You don't knock, you just show up and force your way into the residence. Then there's knock and announce, which happened in Edge Hill, where you knock, you allow what you said was a reasonable amount of time. Maybe that was the issue that happened in Edge Hill. They thought it was enough time. It wasn't. And then they enter the apartment. Could you explain to the committee what the standards are, what the policy is for when you would do a knock and announce? Because I think some members of the community were concerned that the offense for which they were searching for this young man was a very low level property offense. It was like burglarizing vehicles, that did not warrant a forced entry. So is there an official policy as to which offenses a person is suspected of committing warrant a forced entry situation?
Well, first of all, Madam Vice Chair, thank you for the question. And we certainly, as you first pointed out, we as a department understand that this is not about pointing fingers or assigning blame. You know, quite frankly, as a police department, we are obligated to constantly, have our policies and procedures reviewed, whether that's by the community or anyone else, because we're, a public service agency, and that's just reasonable and expected. And I think the department, especially the leadership, understands that and actually appreciates that. But I do appreciate you stating that like you did. So really, there's two scenarios. It's either a no-knock search warrant or it's not. So the no-knock search warrant, as I explained, we do not seek those. So we do not do those here. So having said that, all other search warrants, our policy requires us to show up, make the announcements, utilize the blue lights, utilize the loudspeaker, utilize the knock at the door, make sure we announce, who we are, what we're there for, what we would like for the persons inside, to do. And then wait that reasonable amount of time, and then to make entry if we have to. Now, keep in mind, obviously, and I know everyone's aware of this, but each search warrant has to be not only approved by a supervisor, but obviously a judge has to grant it. So a judge has to look at the evidence as well, as far as what that search warrant is being requested for in terms of the offenses, what the particular crimes are, what the evidence is that's being sought, and has to agree that yes, that information, that probable cause exists, where a search warrant should be granted. So at the point a judge authorizes that, then our policy takes over in terms of how we go and serve that search warrant. So, and I guess you really get down to a point of, if you've been granted a valid search warrant that's been signed by a judge and you're obligated to go serve it at that point, then once we show up, once we do everything in our policies and procedures in terms of the announcements, the knocking, the making of our statements, waiting that reasonable amount of time, beyond that, without getting compliance in terms of the door being open, and we're still obligated to serve that search warrant that we've applied for and been granted in terms of, trying to find evidence related to a crime. Now, to specifically answer your question, there's not a specific list of offenses that would say, for example, if the search warrant's related to property crimes only, then you cannot end up forcing entry, regardless of how it goes at the scene, whether you get compliance or not. So nothing is delineated by offense. It's just whether or not a judge agrees, that you should be granted this search warrant. So, you would eventually get down to a point of if minutes go by and there's no movement and nobody's going to answer the door, then really your only two options are, leave the scene and not serve the search warrant, or to go ahead and breach the door and try to safely do so to accomplish being able to serve it, if that makes sense. So that's overall, that's kind of how that works. It's kind of just either one way or the other. It's not a no knock because we don't do them. So it's automatically going to involve the announcements. And again, after a reasonable amount of time, if we're still obligated to serve the warrant, that we've somehow got in for the location. But obviously, we always hope that's just in a safe manner, quite frankly.
And what is the policy? What is the requirement regarding assuring that if you have a warrant that will allow you obviously what I'm hearing you say is any warrant will allow you forced entry into someone's residence, that you have confirmation that the suspect lives in that residence. What are the requirements? What are the hoops you have to jump through to ensure that the address that you are executing that warrant at is the correct address for the person that you're looking for?
Right, and that is a very good question, and that involves the detectives involved in these cases doing the appropriate amount of investigative work pre-search warrant service. By that, I mean certain things are in our policy to address things like that. You know, we can't be serving search warrants based upon stale information, old information. You know, things have to be refreshed and close to the time we're serving the search warrant. As you said, just to have a reasonable expectation that the person we are seeking for, or the evidence, is still at this location where we're going. So, for instance, a couple things in our policy, for example, and I'll read word for word, actually, if you'll allow me. When appropriate, computer checks should be refreshed within the last 24 hours prior to the operation to ensure accurate information for decisions. Pre-raid surveillance should be utilized to ensure timely, current information. Search warrant service. Basically, all those things. One, I just wanted you to realize things like that are in the policy, but that's our people doing their due diligence to make sure that we're not going to serve a search warrant and it's been a week or two or more before we've even verified that the subject of interest is still at that location, and the evidence would likely still be inside that location. So the short answer is sound, accurate, and deliberate, good investigative work prior to the serving of that search warrant is expected. Not only is it expected, but obviously certain things are in our policy to ensure that that takes place. That's where supervisors come into play to make sure things like that have been done before we serve each and every search warrant. So very good questions, and I understand them. Thank you.
Two more quick questions before I pass the mic to somebody else, and they both have to do with clothing. Really quickly, if you could explain why officers would execute a knock and announce, forced entry search warrant in civilian clothes, regardless of whether or not there's any insignias, why an officer would be clothed in street clothes, even if they're wearing their vest on the outside, versus a regular Metro Nashville uniform. And my second question related to clothes is there any rule or policy against allowing a suspect or a person in a residence during the execution of a warrant to clothe themselves? To Dr. Jackson's question.
Okay. Well, good question. Obviously, in our policy, I mentioned the marked unit before. The specific policy clause states a marked vehicle should be utilized on the perimeter for announcements to ensure the occupants can identify our personnel as police when appropriate. The emergency equipment should be checked before departure and a backup plan established. So obviously on the front end, being able to look out a window and see a marked Metro police car with blue lights and public address system being activated, we feel gives people a reasonable likelihood to know that that's the police department that's at their residence. Specifically as to clothing, many times our detectives, narcotics detectives, for example, who work in plain clothes and who may have beards or long hair or whatever the case may be, are allowed via policy to wear civilian clothes in the service of a search warrant. However, they have to have on Metro Police vest that covers their upper torso area. And again, those vests have to have the required markings on them. The same patches that you'll see on a uniformed officer. Obviously, the words Metro Police, the same badges sewn on that you would see on a regular uniform. So that is allowed under policy, but we're very, very strict about that being the requirement. So have on what we typically call raid vest.
Right.
But all those proper markings have to be on there as well. And to specifically answer your question, and obviously it's hard not to get into hypotheticals here because every situation, quite frankly, is quite a bit different as far as the specific circumstances that you encounter. They just are. However, in general, to answer your question, obviously it would be, ridiculous for me to tell you that that we should not allow somebody ample time to get properly dressed to come answer the door. Obviously, yes, we should do that. Now, if someone says they're trying to get dressed, again, it's a judgment question. So, do you wait 2 minutes? After 5 minutes, do you think they're still trying to get dressed? That those sort of things come into play. But again, when I mention that reasonableness standard, that's where that comes into play. And that's where our supervisors on the scene need to make very, very sure that we're adhering to that reasonableness of that time given as well. So that's very much our responsibility.
Okay, but there's no rule or policy or anything that says due to officer safety that nobody should be allowed to move, until the apartment is cleared.
Well, a little bit different of a question. So, in other words, once we make entry, we need to stabilize the scene on the inside of the apartment, number one, for everybody's safety inside, as well as ours. Now, again, every situation being different, if we make entry and somebody's sitting on the couch, for example, and they happen to maybe be unclothed or just partially clothed or something like that, again, that's where reasonableness comes into play. Let me at least hand you this nearby blanket. Let me walk with you so that you can get some clothes. Yes, all those things fall under that reasonableness standard that we should pay very close attention to on each and every situation like that.
Okay, but no policy that says that they can't allow somebody to cover up.
No, ma'am. There's no policy that would dictate something that specific like that. No, ma'am. That would just be expected for us to do our very best, as long as it didn't compromise anyone's safety, to obviously allow someone to get the clothing they need. Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Vice
Mr.
Chair,
Delgado.
comments? This is Bob Allen.
Yeah, Mr. Allen, absolutely. Could you just hold one moment? I cut Mr. Delgado off earlier. If you remember, I just want to give him the extend and we can come right back to you. I just want to extend.
Okay.
Delgado or Mr. Delgado, feel free if you want to share there to Mr. Allen.
No, I'm fine. Go ahead, Rylan.
Mr. Allen?
Yes. So on actually serving probably hundreds of these search warrants in Nashville, Tennessee, just want to comment just a little bit about the procedure and kind of expand just a touch on what Captain Alexander talked about. So, we pull in the yard to serve a search warrant, whether this be the narcotics unit, the CSU unit, or the SWAT team. There's always a police vehicle, like he said, with blue lights on, announcing police, search warrant, do not resist, come to the door. That's announced continuously, repetitively, as the police, depending who they are, knocking on the door. And because of the size of the house that we look at pre-search warrant time and do a briefing on, we kind of figure from our homes that we live in how long it takes a person to get up out of the bed, put a shirt on, and get themselves to the door before the door is breached. So we take that into consideration when serving search warrants. If they don't get there in a reasonable amount of time, like the captain said, then the door is breached, and then we move in. As officers move into the house, they are continually saying, Metro Police, search warrant, do not resist, lay on the ground, if that's the type of search warrant we're executing. So I just want to let everybody know that although some of those guys and gals coming in may be long-haired and have beards, but they'll have police insignia on, and there's a police car in the yard, and the people in the home should hear police, search warrant, do not resist, lay on the ground. So I just kind of want to tell everybody about that from serving one or two. Hadn't had any problems in the ones we served, and that is continually the process and is still in place today.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Ms. Lucas,
If I may respond to Bob really quickly. I think it's important to point out, though, that, and I don't know necessarily all of what happened in the Edge Hill situation, but as someone who has executed warrants in public housing for years myself, sometimes apartments are far away from where vehicles are, and people may not hear that, if the apartments are clustered together, you may not realize that it's your apartment. There are some reasons why it's confusing. I think the assumption that people are being defiant or not cooperative or not complying, I think we have to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes that they really are, as Ms. Hines was, exhausted from working double shifts. Sometimes where the car may be parked, may be far from the apartment. And so it just may be that people, and if it's dark, if it's 6 o'clock in the morning, they may not recognize that that's what's happening. And so just anything that we can do that you can think of, Bob or Officer Alexander, to even make that even more obvious would be, especially when we're talking about a forced entry situation, would be fantastic.
Yeah, and certainly when, and actually I've helped teach some of those entries into homes when we're conducting search warrants. And, even if they couldn't see the car or couldn't see our uniform, it's the reason officers are taught and practiced on every training mission to kind of say verbal command. This is a police, do not resist, lay on the ground. And they say that continually through the house because obviously the last thing we want to do is injure anyone, and especially somebody who's not involved in the process of trying to hurt us. So, yeah, I think they feel the same, and I know they're trained the same. And if anybody has any ideas on improving that, love to hear that and discuss it.
Yeah, and just follow up on that too, Madam Vice Chair. And it is a good question. I think it's one thing to also, it's important to note that as Bob mentioned, and I didn't cover this earlier, but obviously there is a briefing before each and every search warrant that takes place, and that's where specifics are discussed in terms of, is it a residence, is it a duplex, are we dealing with a townhome, are we dealing with an apartment? If so, obviously, what level is the apartment on, and how do we approach, and where's the parking lot in relation to the door? So, it goes well beyond in the planning stages from the time we're granted the warrant to the time we actually show up to serve it. So supervisors are in that briefing. Those very specific things are being discussed. Everyone is given very specific roles in terms of once we do arrive to the scene, this is where each and every one needs to go. This is why. In certain times, obviously, we would discuss things that you mentioned, which are reasonable concerns. I do agree with you as far as a third floor apartment, maybe over in the back of the building. Would that person necessarily look out and see that police car and realize that we were there, which apartment is it they're coming to in this building? So that is a valid concern, but I just wanted to point out that specific things like that, at least to the best of our ability, would be covered during that pre-search warrant briefing to try to make sure we were as effective as we could be. Like Bob said, quite frankly, to keep everyone safe. And that's why the announcements, once they start on the PA, it's not a one-time announcement. They announce over and over and over. And then, of course, once we're at the door and once we're inside, it's not just a one command either. It's several different commands because we realize we may be startling people, and we're really trying to convey who we are and what we're there for. So we definitely make those efforts. But I just want to make the point that the serving of the search warrant, involves a pretty meticulous briefing where things like that should certainly be discussed. And everyone I've been involved in, they are discussed to try to do it the best we can, for everyone's safety. So it is important, and it's an important consideration.
Thank you, Captain Alexander. Mr. Delgado?
I don't know if I have my hand up or something, but I don't have any questions. So.
Okay, perfect. Not a problem. Not picking on you. Sorry about that. Any additional questions or comments here? I do see Mr. Matthews' hands raised, but I believe that might be earlier as well.
It is.
Perfect. Any additional questions or comments here for cat.
I have a question, Ashley, please, for Captain Alexander. Can you walk us through, if one of the internal, I guess, task force in the police department wants to issue a search warrant? I'm assuming the detective drafts the search warrant, and you mentioned supervisor reviews it. Would that be a sergeant? Is there one layer of review or multiple layers of review? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. Yes, sir. Well, first of all, Mr. Robinson, it's good to see you, and I appreciate the question. Yes, there definitely involves supervisors that would start out at the sergeant level and ultimately would involve a lieutenant. In light of the recent incident in Edgehill, all search warrants currently have to be approved up through a deputy chief at this point. So in my division, for example, if a search warrant is requested from a narcotics detective today, it's going to go to that detective sergeant, to their lieutenant, and then it's going to come to me, and then I'm going to send it to Deputy Chief Henry, who will ultimately agree with it or not, and or approve it. So yeah, it is a very, very good question. So again, and I mentioned supervisors earlier, and they need, their responsibility is to be very meticulous in looking at all the information in that search warrant, not only from a probable cause standpoint, but as I mentioned earlier, has any of this information gone stale? How recent is it that we know that the person we're looking for still resides at this residence where we've obtained a search warrant? How reasonable is it that the evidence that we're seeking would still be in this particular location? So actually all the supervisors in a detective's chain of command would be involved in that. So a sergeant at the very least, and a lieutenant, and of course now a captain and a deputy chief as of today. So supervisors are critical in this particular scenario. I mean, they're obviously they're critical for anything that our officers are doing, but the supervisor, the case investigator, should determine if the things are reasonable, if our plan is reasonable, the validity of the search warrant. And that's where we have to realize that if there's anything in that search warrant that compromises the legitimacy of it, and or obviously furthermore the safety of anyone involved, it's usually not an exigent situation. We have to de-escalate from an administrative standpoint during those times and back up and make sure that that search warrant is put together in the most legitimate way possible, even if that means not serving it until we get everything right about it. So that's where de-escalation, usually we talk about de-escalation, we talk tactically and in the field and that sort of thing. I'm kind of trying to speak to administrative de-escalation, if you will. So the supervisors are responsible to ask the right questions if there's any issues at all about that search warrant. That's what their job is as supervisors. So they have to ask the tough questions. They have to make sure it is as right as it can possibly be before we even set in motion to go serve that search warrant. So I think those are specific things that supervisors are responsible for. And that's nothing new. That's been expected over the years, and it's still expected today.
As a follow-up, is there a specific checklist that the sergeant, lieutenant, captain actually check off each particular point of reference to make sure the policy is being followed?
I know there's an operations checklist pre-search warrant service that has gone through, and it's pretty meticulous in terms of several different aspects of not only that search warrant itself, but how that search warrant operation is going to be carried out. So yes, there are checklists in place. And again, obviously the situations are different. as you know, but the probable cause, obviously, first and foremost needs to be there, but also all the information included in there has got to be fresh, and those things have to be done. We cannot be lazy on any one particular search warrant, regardless of what it's for, regarding any of those issues. So, again, we expect a lot of our supervisors, but that's always been the case. That's still expected today. So it is a pretty meticulous process.
One last follow-up. Just ballpark percentage, what's being sent back down to the detectives? What percentage of the warrants coming up are getting sent back down to revise?
Well, I can only speak from my level. So now you have to keep in mind if a narcotics detective, for example, submits one to his or her sergeant, they have issues with it and send it back to that detective to get those issues fixed. I would not necessarily know that. However, I expect that to be done. And so at that point, once the sergeant got it back, he's going to send it to his or her lieutenant. And then again, if the lieutenant sent it back, I wouldn't necessarily know that, but the lieutenant's going to try to make sure he or she has it exactly right before they send it to me. Now, just to the best honest answer I can give you is only from my perspective. So once I receive them from my lieutenant, it is very rare that I would send them back. However, it is not rare for me to ask some specific questions that I may have about that search warrant or about that scenario. I mean, the fact of the matter is we just take it that seriously. So I wouldn't say I have to send a lot of them back. However, I would say that a good supervisor is going to ask the appropriate questions and is not going to okay or approve it until they're comfortable that it's put together in the best possible way that it can be.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for it.
Hey, Warwick, may I add to the answer the captain made?
Please, feel free, Mr.
So, in times when I served a few of those search warrants for Nashville, like we were on the tactical team and some of the high risk offenders, like let's say a murder suspect we were looking for and had to do a search warrant on his place, that one of the tactics I really liked, and not sure if it still goes on because I've been gone for 5 years, but I liked it, was that the person or the affiant who wrote the search warrant, who got it approved by the judge, and said, yes, y'all can go pick up this murder suspect at his girlfriend's house or his house or whatever, was that the person who wrote the warrant, who did the most research, who surveilled the house, who ran the tags on the car in the driveway to make sure the murder suspect was there, actually went with us, the SWAT team, when we served the search warrant, and he had to, especially where there's like an apartment complex or something, he had to touch the door that we were to enter. So there was no mistake about, well, I wonder which door it is because they all look the same or whatever. They actually had to touch the door and get out of the way and then let us conduct a search warrant. I thought that helped out from mistaken identity houses we accidentally hit.
And also, too, thank you, Bob. And if I could just follow up with everyone, a couple things in our policy that you may find interesting in terms of making sure the information is current and not stale. But some of our policy statements are pretty specific as far as the operational planning before these occur. One such example is this: identifying and analyzing crimes, including information such as criminal history, known associates, history of weapons involvement, propensity for violence, other relevant background information on a particular subject. It is recommended that the reconnaissance of the target structure area be conducted by personnel other than the affiant listed on the search warrant. This is to ensure that the description listed on the search warrant sufficiently describes the location to exclude all others, and any person can easily find the location based on the description alone. It is also recommended that the person who conducts the reconnaissance effort or the affiant be utilized to lead the entry of the personnel to the target door. Briefing the objective and details of the operation plans include a description of how officers were familiarized with the neighborhood or the area, the facts of the case, et cetera, et cetera. So, we've even got backup plans within the policy that it's not just the affiant, the one particular lead detective but we have a follow-up detective that can describe the location to the exclusion of all others as well. All this is in an effort and a goal to ensure that we're as accurate as we possibly can be before going to serve a search warrant at any location. So there are several safeguards in place. I'm not saying that more could not be recommended and put into place. I just wanted to share some of that with you all. That's our existing wording, word for word, on a few clauses like that. So it's a pretty meticulous policy as it stands right now.
Madam Chair, if I could, I'll make one more comment and then I'll shut up.
Of course, no, don't feel free.
So one of the things when we sit in the briefing before, like the captain advised, one of the things we do in the briefing, talking about here's the house, here's the fences around it, here's the dogs that may attack you, here's the guy that comes to the door every time he sells narcotics with a gun in his hand, was the briefing about the search warrant. So when the affiant got the search warrant signed by the judge, they obviously bring that to us at the briefing. And we, every person in there got to read the search warrant. So we got to see the address, got to see the people's names on it, the description of the house we're about to hit. And if anybody thought something was amiss or didn't look right, then that search warrant would be called off and we'd do it another time. And there is a limit to the number of days you have to actually serve a search warrant. And it's only 5 days. So if you can't get it done in 5 days, you have to do something else to draw another search warrant. So it's not a long time we're waiting before that plan is executed. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Thank you also to Captain Alexander here. I just want to extend and make sure we're not missing anyone who has any remaining questions or comments here from the committee before we thank Mr. Captain Alexander for his time. Not then, Captain Alexander, we certainly thank you. We know we asked you for 30 minutes, a bit more over that. So thank you so much for your time this evening. We appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. No, thank you all very much. And I appreciated the questions. I enjoyed the open, candid conversation with everyone. So thanks to you all for allowing me to be here and discuss some of those things with you. Moving forward, I'm happy to come back at any time offline. Feel free to email, call. We can continue this dialogue. I'm certainly happy to do that. So I'm open and accessible to any of you all that may want to reach out. So thank you for your work, and everyone stay safe.
Thank you. You as well. We wish you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We have with us this evening also Executive Director Fitchard. I want to thank Director Fitchard. One, she joined us early in the beginning of the meeting and remains here with us as well. This is our second expert testimony here, and Director Fitchard, can you hear us? Are you online here with us, Phil?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak to speak about the Community Oversight Board. I want to give you as much information as I can in my short time with you. So I'll begin a little bit with the history and the authority of the COB, touch on the challenges and priorities, and close out with future expectations and best practices. I don't know how much everyone knows about the COB who are on this committee, so that's why I want to give you a little brief oversight. So the history of the Community Oversight Board. So in October 2016, the Driving While Black report recommended that an oversight board be implemented after analyzing traffic stops in Nashville. In 2017 and 2018, 2 Black men were fatally shot and killed by MMPD. The killing of Jacquees Clemens in February 2017 sparked outrage in the city and started the grassroots process of forming the Community Oversight Board by members of the coalition group called Community Oversight Now. In January of 2018, the Metro City Council voted against a public hearing on creating a Community Oversight Board. But on April 4th, in observance of the 50-year death of Dr. Martin Luther King, the coalition decided to move forward with bringing the issue directly to the Nashville voters as a Metro Charter amendment. It was in July 2018 that Daniel Hambrick was shot and killed by an MMPD officer. On November the 6th, 2018, Amendment 1 was ratified by 59% of the voters, and the Community Oversight Board was born. In January 2019, the 11 board members were elected and confirmed by Metro Council and met for the first time in February 2019. The first executive director was hired in April 2019, and the first staff members were hired in June of 2019. In November of 2019, the executive director resigned, and in December 2019, the assistant director, myself, became the newest executive director. So I gave you that history because I wanted to let you know, as I go into what the challenges are, what the priorities are, what the best practices are, is how this time period has been a very short one for all the work that we have at least tried to accomplish. And so I just wanted to kind of give you that overview. So let's talk a little bit about the oversight models and the power and the authority that the Nashville COB has. So the common models for civilian oversight bodies are the review-focused model, the investigative-focused model, the monitoring and auditing model, and the hybrid model. The Nashville COB is a hybrid model, and this model is preferred because it has the ability and option to operate as an investigative auditor and monitor, which provides the greatest amount of accountability for civilian oversight. Amendment 1 outlines our power and duties under Section 11.302, and it states, the board has the power to investigate allegations of MMPD officer misconduct against members of the public, as well as issue policy advisory and resolution reports, and have the option of establishing a monitoring program that provides an ongoing review or audit of the complaint process that's administered by the Office of Professional Accountability. The board also has the option of forwarding resolution reports that produce factual findings of criminal misconduct and civil rights violations to the district attorney, the grand jury, or the United States attorney. The COB has a staff that handle the day-to-day operations of the department. The staff is made up of myself and 9 other full-time employees, and that's important too, so that we have this distinction. We have an assistant director, a legal advisor, 3 investigators, a community liaison, an administrative assistant, and 2 research analysts. The staff office is named the Metro Nashville Community Oversight, or the MNCO, to separate the board from the staff, to keep down the confusion that was happening early on when members of the community were approaching board members out in the public and actually taking, misconduct complaints directly to the board members instead of the staff. And so we had to kind of make that distinction, just to kind of distinguish the two, to let them know that they're the same, but kind of separate. So that kind of closes out the history portion. I'll move into the challenges that we faced as a brand new entity. So Nashville experienced some of the challenges that other oversight agencies experienced because it was new to everyone. It was new to the city, we had a new board, new staff. It was new to the community, as well as to the police department. And as we all know, oversight isn't the most comfortable thing, and definitely something that was wanted, and in my opinion, was also needed in Nashville. Some of the challenges that we faced were building a new agency from the ground up without a lot of support and very little guidance from Metro government. Understanding the process and the role we played with the police department, the community, and other governmental departments. The emergency notification call-out process was an issue. Obtaining access to records to begin investigations and meet the needs of the community was an issue. Crime scene access was an issue. Relationship building with stakeholders. There was a lack of trust between the police department of the COB and its investigation process. Misunderstandings, lack of cooperation. One of the main issues was timelines, which getting things accomplished took months, and that is something that we still experience. And there were multiple changes in leadership. There was a change in the mayor and his administration. So we lost our community justice liaison. We had our ED resign, and we had a lot of board member turnover because their terms had expired. So I would say that those were some of our main challenges. And then I would say that the challenges were really some tumultuous times. The board on many occasions felt disempowered. There was talk of feeling burned out. They were just going in circles, lots of frustration, not making significant progress, and feeling like the administration misunderstood the importance of their role in the collaboration of the two agencies. And although there were many challenges, some we face even today, just quite frankly, we experienced those tumultuous times, but the board stayed the course. They were really proactive. The board has met over 45 times during its 19 months of existence, and it's really probably closer to 50 times. And some of those I may have forgotten about, but those are the ones that I tried to count. The board members spent many hours, and remember, these board members are volunteers. These are not paid individuals. So the board members spent many hours working on our bylaws, our rules, our processes, and supporting the needs of the MNCO staff and community. We were proactive with reaching out to stakeholders and asking for their support and engaging with the community. But I would say, unfortunately, I think where we lacked was there was little coordination with the MMPD during this time. And then during the transition of leadership, there was an intersection of building and priorities. So the building piece is we were still building out our infrastructure, which was a huge endeavor that was happening at the same time as our challenges were taking place. And I became really focused on where we were experiencing deficits in our internal processes. And it was clear that outreach was lacking, as well as our connecting with MMPD stakeholders. I had an ambitious calendar to do ride-alongs with officers at every precinct and to host community listening sessions and trainings. And then the tornado and COVID happened. Because if you can recall, I just got the position in December, and then 3 months later, we had a tornado and COVID happen. So my priorities are, and have been, and still are, and not in any particular order, were hiring an assistant director, community outreach and education, structuring our internal processes, creating our SOPs, obtaining access to MMPD records and crime scenes. And just as a side note, we are in negotiation this month with MMPD to obtain an updated MOU, and we can talk a little bit about that later, to make certain that we had our research advisory reports on MMPD policy and policing practices in place. The procedure it is, and then connecting with MMPD stakeholders. Those were my priorities, and also creating the process for resolution reports for alleged misconduct, so those could move forward to the board for resolution. And you know, those things are still underway. So I would say overall, what we need is real police accountability, transparency, and cooperation. That starts with you supporting those who have been commissioned to do the work of police oversight. NACO, which is our national organization, lists meaningful oversight as those that have independence, are community-driven, empowered, proactive, and transparent. And I believe that Nashville has built its oversight agency on those principles. And I'll say Nashville, and maybe you don't know this, but Nashville has one of the strongest oversight models in the country. And with the cooperation of the MMPD, we can meet all the national best practices. Some of those best practices, which, and I'll talk a little bit about this afterwards, but some of the best practices in oversight start with having unfettered access to department data and records, subpoena power, the review of police disciplinary and personnel files, the authority to investigate, to take testimony, audit, or review internal investigations or processes and make policy recommendations. Operating budget built into the charter. Board can make disciplinary recommendations. Police misconduct data posted publicly for greater transparency and accountability. And I will say that we have all of those. All of those things, those are best practices, except for the unfettered access to department data and records, but that is something that we are working on, and I am hopeful that we will get past that too. So I would say that we have a very strong model. And like I said, it's one of the best in the country. So in closing, you know, we are making strides to be an agency where our staff is credentialed oversight practitioners. We're going through the process of being credentialed now, and that our agency is accredited through the national organization. That's what we're working towards as well. Our ultimate goal is to be a national model for effective oversight and have the most impactful board in this country. We also want our collaboration with the police department to be one that others across the nation can look to as an example of how to work together for the betterment of our communities that we both serve. We have been contacted, and I know that I haven't shared this, but we have been contacted by many across this country who are taking note of what's happening in Nashville regarding police oversight. Apparently, our name, Community Oversight Board, is being talked about at universities across this country. You know, USC, Northwestern, you know, the University of Maryland, you know, in New York. So I'm very pleased with that. And so you know, it keeps us motivated as well. So I'm going to close with this, because I know we're kind of running out of time and I want to give you opportunity to have some Q&As. So the COB, under the direction of our past chair, has shown resilience, tenacity, strength, amazing leadership, and patience through these tough challenges. The dedication of the Nashville community and the commitment to police reform has been our guiding light. We are aligned in our mission to move this city into the 21st century policing model and have a police department that represents the needs of all communities in Nashville in an equitable and respectful way. We would not be here today if it weren't for the many community members who stand with us in solidarity as we continue to push for systemic change and root out structural and systematic oppression in our police department. Now more than any other time in the history of oversight, the oversight of police is needed. We are all aware of the many instances of excessive force and police violence that have occurred across this country and in our city. And so it is up to us as an entire community to seek out ways to make our police and community relationship better, safer, equitable, unbiased, fair, accountable, and transparent. So thank you all for having me. I appreciate being here and able to share a little bit about where we are, what our priorities are, what we're experiencing. And so I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Fichter. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. I'll yield here to members of the committee. Are there any questions here?
I have
Vice
a
Chair
few
Lucas?
questions. Yes. Hi, welcome, Ms. Pritchard. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being with us, and I really admire you for stepping into a really, gosh, what a challenge you took on, and you've done an excellent job. Thank you so much for your service. Did I understand that the council has taken up the issue of subpoena power, and it actually, did it pass on second reading recently?
It did. And so it passed actually this month. And so the subpoena power that we have, it actually was just to move forward the process. You know, I know that, and maybe you guys are aware that there was some language in the original charter of the Amendment 1 that stated that we could have officers compel officers. That part was taken out by the judiciary, and so what the subpoena power gives us now is that we have to take our subpoena in front of a legislative body. It can't be a blanket subpoena. It has to have specifics, but we can ask for, it's similar to what a subpoena ducis tecum is, where you would ask for documents. But I think that we can also ask, you know, an individual to come in if we needed to, but mostly I think that we just will probably need documents, video cameras, anything that falls under the subpoena ducis tecum. The thing is that what the process will allow us to do is to request a subpoena, and it can be passed on one reading instead of going through the purpose of the three. So that's what happened, and that was, I think it was September the 14th that was passed.
Great. One of the things that the organization that I represent is NOAA. We actually helped work on the formation of in the initial stages of the Community Oversight Board. But one of the things that NOAA is very interested in is the idea of going to what you spoke about with real police accountability, the idea of audits, having the body worn camera footage audited, having the reports audited, so that it's not just up to a community member to file a complaint, but for true sort of oversight to see, the person on the NOAA committee with me, we're both healthcare providers, and we know that, our licensing board, and insurance companies can audit us at any moment. And so all of our reports, all of our paperwork can be requested. Is that a function that either the COB is involved in to some extent now, or excuse me, MNCO? I want to make that distinction. Does MNCO participate in any kind of audits? I think you mentioned something about audits of the OPA complaints. And if not, is that a task that the MNCO would be open to participating in? Is some sort of auditing process to just kind of keep tabs, and so officers know their cameras, their reports, whatever, can be audited at any time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we haven't started that. I think, just to kind of, to give you a little background, I want to say it was in either January or February, I had, because I get notifications, I had an uptick in the use of tasers for the use of force. And because I had this uptick in the use of tasers, I wanted to actually audit those records to see, like, why was this happening? What was happening? And so, yeah, I think that an auditing portion is something that we definitely will be involved in. We just haven't done it a lot because, of course, with COVID came, and we still have a lot of unfinished business that needed to be handled. But yeah, I think that is a really good accountability tool. And so, yes, we're definitely going to be using that tool, as well as, our research team would audit some of that stuff as well, and when they're doing their research. And
okay.
So, yeah.
Is there anything, I heard you say, I'm very familiar with the difficulty you had with MNPD not abiding by, first of all, coming to the table to actually sign the MOU, and then abiding by the MOU once it was signed and in place. Is there anything that this commission can do with regards, I think you said something about updating the MOU, and you might be speaking to that in a moment, but is there anything, any recommendations that you feel could help strengthen that relationship between the COB and the MNPD in terms of that MOU?
So what happened, let me just give you a little background and segue into that. So we had an MOU, it was signed in January, the 1st of January. It was maybe like a month and a half negotiation process. And so from January up until, I would say, midsummer, June, I realized that the MOU just didn't meet what it is that we needed. Our needs weren't being met. And so there's a portion of our MOU that allows for us to come back to the drawing table and discuss the issues. And so what we did was, myself and my team, I was just concerned about the MOU not really allowing us the full freedoms to do the kind of investigations that we needed. And so we revised it. We spent some time with our board, as well as with each other, revising and strengthening the areas in the MOU that we found had deficits. And so that is the MOU that we are currently working towards. We have a meeting coming up on Tuesday for the negotiation process of the MOU. And I will say that, I did attend a negotiation meeting maybe last week, I think it was, and it seemed to go really well. And it seems like we had some really good cooperation.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lucas. Thank you, Director Pickard. Any other questions or comments here from members of the committee?
Hey, Ashley.
Captain Oliver?
Yeah, LaShawn, can you hear
sir.
me? Hey,
Absolutely. So,
I wanted to just say thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. I believe you said 59% of Nashvillians voted for the COB, and I'm one of those people who believe in democracy and in the social contract, which allows citizens to give up some and pass laws in the democratic process with an understanding that we get back in return. And one of those things here in Nashville, we gave up to have public servants like the police department to protect us and whatnot. We have an expectation that these public service serves our best interests and need. And with that said, I think without the continual trust and transparency, what will happen in a democratic society is people will break down and believe that there's no fairness, there's no true reason to continue forward. And so with the COB and the other issues I'm keeping in mind going around the country, when we're talking about the issue of policing, it's going to be very, very important that if we're going to look at everything that the police are doing today and move forward, we have to continue to have that trust built in the system and in the process, and even in those public servants who are doing the job of law enforcement to uphold those laws, but making sure that they're doing it fairly and impartial. And so it bothered me just a little bit, I will say, to hear that you all were having trouble getting data. I think if going forward, we're going to improve that trust and transparency as law enforcement officials, we have to remember that part of upholding the democratic process and making sure that we are here to serve the people and that we are public servants who are an extension of the government, and we're a government agency, that we have to then do what it is that's being asked of us. And that accountability piece is the COB, and they're independent. And so I definitely want to encourage that there's something in writing that will assure that whenever there's something the COB is requesting, as metropolitan Nashville people have voted already for, that they're getting it and getting it in a timely manner without any delay. So that's one of the biggest things I wanted to make sure I add, Jill, because I think it's an important job that you all are doing, but I think it goes hand in hand, because when officers are doing their job and they're doing it correctly, they're not having to worry about public perception, because there is parts of our job that is very, very not necessarily ideal for the optics or the eye for the untrained. But if we know what those trainings are and what's expected, people will understand that was the job and they did it right. And having an independent agency to say either one way or another when it comes to how we do it, I think that's important. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
thanks very much, Captain Oliver. Any additional questions or comments here?
I have one follow-up. We just heard from Captain Alexander about the situation in Edge Hill. My understanding is that the situation involving Ms. Hines, the innocent resident who had the knock and announce warrant executed, that Acting Chief Drake himself asked you all to come in and investigate that case. And my question to you is that correct? Is the MNCO investigating what happened in Edge Hill? And if so, do you have any idea of when a report would be available from the MNCO or the COB as to what their recommendations are regarding that situation?
So we have an active investigation with that case now. So okay. I don't know what the timeline is. We have a 60-day timeline built into our procedures and our SOPs. And so I don't think that we're at the 60-day mark. Hopefully, since I haven't followed up on that case, I would hope that we have received all of the, I think that there was an issue that we hadn't received all the body worn camera information. And so that process is underway, but we did request it. And so, and just remember, this case with what happened in Edge Hill also intersected at the same time that we're trying to get this unfettered access to records. So there may have been some slight delay on the records that we were requesting because, of course, there's an open investigation. It's not a criminal investigation though, so there really shouldn't be any holdups. But I don't know the ins and outs of it. But what I will say to you, since you guys are researching policy on searches, that I would say to you to check out the policy for MDHA housing properties, and it's in the police manual, and it's 5.30. I think will shed some light a little bit into the policies. It's in the police policy manual.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, questions, comments here from members of the committee? I'll give a moment here in case anyone wants to unmute and cut me off. But while I have the moment, I just want to thank you. I'm sure your day did not begin at 6 p.m. when you joined us. So thank you so much for spending your Thursday evening with us, for sharing very candidly your perspective, and also just the short but furious of the COB in this purposeful work. I do want to highlight here that Captain Oliver did, and I'm a philosophy major or study philosophy, so when he says stop social contract, my ears pop up. But there's an incredibly important point that our member made tonight about the social contract and trust between our community and our police officers. And I just want to echo, because we had an incredible visit last week at the training academy, where we continue to meet these incredible men and women who are putting their lives on the line every single day. And I want us to keep in mind that there is an important line of importance and responsibility we have to keep intent and impact in mind here, so that nothing that we're recommending takes away the heroism, the incredible studies that we have. Mr. Allen is a great example, Mr. Pulley as well, of what leadership looks here. We're just seeking to find the very best of what our people can be. And so we're going to likely reach out, Director Fitchett, if we have follow-up questions here. But as you can see, our people, our committee, we're fired up to get it right, and we're okay with different ideas. So thank you so much tonight.
No problem. Thank you. And I'm always available. I did want to just close with, there are two programs that are significant programs that I would like for you all to know about if you don't know. One is the EPIC program, which is out of New Orleans, and the acronym is for Ethical Policing is Courageous. It's something that the New Orleans Police Department has put out, and it's fantastic, as well as a similar program out of the Georgetown Law School. It's called the ABLE program, and it's active bipartisanship for law enforcement. I know that the active bipartisanship for law enforcement, the ABLE program, will also give free training. I think it's something that our police department would really benefit from. So I leave that with you with the committee, for you all to just take some time and review those two programs, and anything that we can do to help enhance our police professionals and have a good partnership with them, I think is where my mindset is and where the board is. And so we are looking forward to working closely with whoever the new chief of police will be. So thank you for having me. And like I said, I'm always available if you need to contact me via email or phone.
Ashley, can I ask a question of Ms. Fitchett real quick, please? Ms. Fitchett, I might have missed it. Has the Metro Police Department assigned an officer or a supervisor as a full-time, not full-time, but to work specifically and be a liaison with the COB?
Not as of yet. It is something that I had talked with the mayor's administration with. I think I talked to Mr. Button about it actually, but we haven't had that. I've been actually reaching out to Deputy Chief Hagar for most of the things that we need. But no, we don't have a liaison.
It seems like that would be an obvious move by the department to have a liaison that understands your goals and job and frustrations so that he or she could go back to the department and try to help work some of those up, work some of those out. Maybe that's ultimately something we can suggest, or I don't think we have the power to do anything about that, but I think it's certainly something that should be looked at more or scrutinized more heavily than maybe it has in the past. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I think that's an incredible point. We should certainly keep it in mind, especially as we go into our preliminary recommendations. Even if that means it's an asterisk and a miscellaneous, it's too important for us not to include, I think. And we can certainly talk about that more. Thank you, Director Fitchard. I don't see any, so we won't keep you much longer than we have unless you have any additional closing comments for us.
No, I think that I've said all the, I've had a mouthful, but like I said, I just thank you all for the work that you're doing as well to enhance our police department and review the policies. And myself and my team are always here to answer your questions. Dr. Valier is online and he's fantastic and he helps us so much. And so he's been, from what I heard, a really great help for you all as well. So thank you all for having me. And if you need to contact me, I'm always available. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members here. Yes, ma'am. We come to the closing of our meeting here, and I just want to acknowledge we're able to touch a lot of the important touch points thanks to Vice Chair as it relates to our member assignments. I know many people have already huddled smaller groups to determine how they're going to meet. I believe Vice Chair Lucas will do one more circle back later on this, either at the end of this week, which we're approaching, or early next week, to make sure everyone has a meeting in place before we come together. But the thing is that we are positioned to bring together our preliminary recommendations, and what you have our commitment on is that we'll give you direction on just how to put this together, all of the ideas, how all of the thoughts, so that you can have a productive meeting. And so there are a few ways that we can do that to make sure everyone comes to the table ready to present. In the meantime, though, the only big ask here, two of them is one, please remember Member Bilal's ask that you take time to go through the information and to respond to her email directly so that she is positioned to represent us well next week in the next data committee meeting. And also that we would really do ask that if you ready that your group zero in on when you're meeting. Perhaps you need to set aside a little bit longer than a half hour. If you do choose to meet in public, in person, it 3 or 4, but please ensure that you are absolutely able to, one, keep a mask on and practice social distancing. It's far too important not to. And if you're like me and you're going to meet longer than 45 minutes, bring a snack so you can stay engaged. It's too important not to as well. Those are my closing announcements here. I just want to extend the space and floor to anyone else that might have announcements or information that we didn't touch on tonight.
I just wanted to ask if there would be another opportunity for us to meet in person on a Thursday night with social distancing. I think that there was a lot of great conversation that was had last week because we had that opportunity to interact in that way, and just wanted to see if that might be an option again.
Thank you, Ms. Bilal. Thank you. I'm sorry, part of my notes. I actually sent an email to Mr. Button, Ms. Cirillo, and Mr. Brown. I believe that was, and Ms. Lucas, keep me honest here, but I think it was Tuesday this week, a little earlier in the week, requesting their assistance in identifying a place for us to meet at the very least for our two strategizing sessions. So for the first one coming up, I believe the first or second week of October, and then the one where we are putting our final recommendations in place. So sorry I did mention that, but we will have our weekly huddle with Mr. Bunton, Cirillo, and Brown tomorrow morning, and then we'll follow up with you all, because the real limitation here is that we'd have to make sure it's a metro location, or ITS can connect in and make sure the public can listen in properly. But we are working on that, absolutely. Any additional questions here? And thank you, Ms. Bilal, for reaching. I believe Mr. Delgado raised that too. Sorry about forgetting to say that. Any additional questions or comments here from anyone else? Okay. Say forever hold your peace, but really, truly just trying to get folks out before 9 o'clock. Again, thank you. This is week 5, and to Ms. Bilal's point, it was a true pleasure to see those of you that were able to make it in person. It was like meeting Facebook friends in person or something. It was pretty awesome. And so hopefully we'll be able to do it again. But I express to you truly my tremendous thanks, because the questions asked tonight showed just how engaged every single one of us are in this important work. So, and everyone well, and have a good evening. Take care.
You too, Ashley. Thank you.